Hello, everyone. So I see it's December, and the last 6 or 8 weeks, if you've been following anything I do, it's been all about Mary, 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 The Lost Mary, my new book, Rediscovering the Mother of Jesus. I hope you're not tired of me talking about it. I've done a lot of interviews. I've been traveling for the last 6 or 8 weeks and giving lectures and presentations and book events and so forth. And part of that is a slideshow that I put together, and I want to share it with you. So, this is from one of the events. The audio is not the clearest. It's easy to understand, but it's not like a professional recording in a studio. But I also have a set of notes that I use in that slideshow, 2 pages of all the essential material on Mary from the New Testament, and then the fading of Mary in Luke Acts. So you can have a PDF of these notes. If you look in the description, there's a link, and you can just click on it and open it up and print it out so that you'll actually have the notes as well. So what follows is the slideshow. It's about 38 minutes, and it will give you visuals for a lot of what I cover in the book. And if you haven't read the book, I hope it will excite you and encourage you to get the book and read it. It's available in print, but also ebook if you prefer that, and audio. And guess who I got to read the audio? I read the entire book out loud as part of a professional recording in a studio, and that sound quality is absolutely excellent. So enjoy the slides, and I hope you learn a lot. This is an image of Mary I want to start with. This is the Mary that everybody does know. This Mary has certainly not been marginalized. Some of the terms that are frequently used, and if you're Roman Catholic, you'll be more familiar with these than if you're Protestant or if you're Jewish or Muslim or some other tradition. But even if you are some of these other traditions rather than Roman Catholic, you still probably have heard these things in movies and books and from relatives and friends. So this is Mary, Queen of Heaven. She's holding her infant Jesus. Notice she has the crown of the queen. She's ever virgin, so she's been removed from earth to heaven. Her body has been assumed to heaven. She's much like Jesus, no longer thought of as an earthly flesh and blood human being, although that's actually disputed, in terms of what ascent to heaven means. But certainly in this statue, she has the moon under her feet, which is taken from the book of Revelation, chapter 12. And normally she has a crown of stars. Whenever the rosary is prayed, we know the term Holy Mary, Mother of God. Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. That prayer has been prayed more times than the Our Father, certainly. That prayer has been prayed, that phrase has been said more than any phrase ever in the human language, I would maintain. These images are pretty familiar. Mary's usually pictured as youngish, teenage probably, 14, 15, 16, 17. She's pure. She has the heart of Jesus, as you see on the left. And we also have her assumed into heaven. Notice the moon is under her feet. The stars make up her crown in this wonderful painting. Whenever I get to Jerusalem, with my students every year, most of them have never been, these are the newbies. I go on, this is the road right outside Newgate on the north of the city. So Damascus Gate is further down. So what do I do with the students? I walk them right to this vantage point, and then I stop and I do this little shtick. I say, hey, you guys, here we are in Jerusalem, the Jewish city of Jesus. Look up. And I point to this. This is Notre Dame, right outside the old city. One of the highest points of the old city, anywhere around you can look and see this. And what I say to the students is, why is that Jewish girl with the little Jewish boy on top of the Catholic center? And they look at me a while and they go, there's a Jewish girl up there? Here's a close-up of the Jewish girl. And of course, then they laugh and they get my point. I think this will play. I took my dean to visit the tomb of Mary at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Some of you have been there, I'm sure. And these sweet sisters were singing their devotions in Latin, and I just couldn't resist filming that. I taught at Our Lady, as you can see, from 1979 to 85. I'm not Roman Catholic, but I was hired as a professor of New Testament there. And here she is overlooking the wonderful campus in South Bend, Indiana, with the old building from the 19th century, the Hall of Administration. It really is a sublime and wonderful place. And so as I come to you as a scholar, as an academic historian of religion, I want you to know that I have great respect and great feelings for Mary as a human being and as one to whom untold millions are very devoted to. So nothing that I say historically, I intend in any way to impinge upon that faith, that devotion. And I guess here I'm just giving you my credentials, that I understand the Catholic Church and I'm very familiar with all things Catholic and especially Our Lady. In Nazareth, there's this wonderful statue I'll come back to later of the Holy Family. So here you see the little boy Jesus and Joseph and Mary. I love that statue. It's at the Sisters of Nazareth Covenant. This is my favorite statue of Mary in all of Jerusalem. Whenever I walk from the Knights Palace, where we tend to stay at the Mount Zion Dig, to the dig, I pass her every morning, and I took this about 5:30 in the morning as it was just beginning to light. You see the rays coming in on her. And she's in her little glass case. I want to invite her out and I want her to walk around Jerusalem with me because I want to ask her questions like, show me the house you lived in and what was it like in those days? But I love this statue in Jerusalem. This is the opening sentence of the book, and it actually is going to tell you why I'm giving this lecture. Let me read it to you, with you. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the most famous but least known woman in history. I spent the past 2 decades investigating this remarkable paradox. How can she be so recognized and revered and at the same time almost wholly forgotten? So clearly, I have something in mind here, which will unfold as we go. You might think that Mary would be mentioned just all over the place in the New Testament. And if you've never really tallied the references, you will be shocked to know that they are very few. There are basically 9 main passages because some repeat. 9 main scenes, a couple of them I'm combining here. And I'm not going to read all of these, but just as a survey, because my job was to take these little breadcrumbs of Mary that run through the tradition for about 100 years and to somehow, from those bare mentionings of this extraordinary woman, see if I could do what we would call the quest for the historical Mary. I mean, with Jesus, we have whole gospels, although he didn't write them. But you know, there's a whole enterprise for 200 years now of trying to get back to Jesus. We have more sources for Jesus. How do you get to Mary? You all know the birth and genealogy accounts in Matthew and Luke. One of the things I build on in the book, I'm not going to emphasize in this lecture because it would be a separate lecture, but I believe that Mary not only had Davidic lineage, and I do think this is her lineage, even though many scholars say, oh, Tabor thinks that, how crazy. Yeah, I do think that, and I think it's a really important thing in recovering her history. I also think she was Hashmonean, as she's priestly. She's both royal as well as priestly, and the book builds a lot around that, and I think you'll be surprised to learn the evidence. Then we all know the story at age 12. His mother said, do you see her name there? His mother said, your father and I. Wedding at Cana, this is John. I got ahead of myself. John never mentions Mary by name. Does that surprise you? It did me. I'd never really laid out the evidence. So wedding at Cana, and right after that, Jesus takes his mother and brothers to Capernaum. Now we do learn a little there, because why is Jesus taking his mother and brothers? It's a family move, and it's very important because Jesus sets up a strategic headquarters at Capernaum. When you have a passing phrase like Jesus takes his mother and brothers, not Joseph takes his family. And to speculate, a speculation that of course is not mine, it's also in the ancient church, that Joseph may have died early on. And so Mary is a single mother. If she only has one child, that's a challenge enough. But if she has 8 children, which I think she likely did, then that's a real challenge. Then we have a reference at Capernaum. His mother and brothers come. They're at Capernaum. The house is crowded. You can't even get in. If you've been to Nazareth Village, which is the reconstruction of Nazareth, you've seen something of what a house might be, but this is Peter's house. You can see the archaeology under the Roman Catholic chapel that's built over it at Capernaum. I'm assuming some of you have been. This is usually taken as negative about Mary, that his mother and brothers come and they can't get in the door because it's so crowded and they live there. And Jesus says, who is my mother and my brothers and sisters? Those who hear and do the word of God. I take this as an extremely positive story. I think it's incorrect to take it as negative. I take it as positive in this way, that Jesus is essentially saying to the crowd that is gathered, mi casa, su casa, yes, my mother and brothers are outside. We'll fit them in, but you're all my mother and brothers. You don't have to leave. If you're here to hear the word of God, we're all one family. I take it as very positive. I think I'm correct. I know it's usually been taken as negative, like Jesus is kind of, I only care about my spiritual family, not my earthly family. I don't think that that's true of a son with his mother. Nazareth, number 5. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? That verse is the most important verse in the New Testament for me to use in beginning to reconstruct the family, which I do in the book. And that would be that Mary has Jesus and 4 brothers that we have named here, including the great James, who becomes leader of the movement when Jesus dies. And then I think 3 sisters. Maria was one of them, Salome, and Anna, or Anne, as we know her, named after the grandmother. This is tradition. We don't know for sure the name of the sisters, but that would make 8. There's an oblique reference right here in Jerusalem, number 6. We were not born of fornication. You're a Samaritan. You know, these are enemies of Jesus, casting doubt upon the pregnancy of Mary indirectly or even directly. You know, some people interpret it as they're just saying we weren't born, because he said you're of your father the devil. He said we weren't born of fornication. But if you read it in Greek, it's sort of like we weren't born in fornication like you were, it's implied. So don't be talking to us about who our father is. I'm not going to give a lecture on anything about the father. For this lecture, we'll just have Joseph as the father, which is the standard view of most scholars. And then notice you jump to the crucifixion. That's it. No more Mary stories. And all of a sudden you're at the crucifixion and you have his mother. This is John. Doesn't even say her name. His mother, her sister, Mary, wife of Clopas, Mary Magdalene, and others at the crucifixion with the 12 after Jesus' death. Oh, I'm so glad that this one verse is in the book of Acts. That's one of my little bread morsels left behind as I follow the trail of Mary, because I can now put her in the upper room with the apostles as they appoint someone to replace Judas. And there's a solid tradition that Mary
There's her name. The mother of Jesus and his brothers are in Jerusalem after Jesus' death with the 12. And I think that's where she stays. Paul does mention Mary, sort of, when he says Jesus, God sent forth his son, born of a woman. Well, that would have to be Mary, but he doesn't give her name. He doesn't say anything about her. Did Paul ever meet Mary? We're going to get to that. Absolutely, he must have met Mary, but he never mentions it. As he said, we don't know Jesus after the flesh. And even if we knew him once after the flesh, like his family, we don't know him that way any longer. And he wasn't really interested in the earthly Jesus. So that's the text. I build most of my book on that, but there is archaeology and there is on the ground insights that I'm going to share with you. Now, here's a map of the Galilee in the time of Jesus. Notice Nazareth is here, south of Sepphoris. So to the southeast of Sepphoris, I've walked this many, many times. I'll show you a picture in a minute. It's the Beit Netofa Valley. Sepphoris is the urban capital of all Galilee, which you might not know is at Jaffa, or Joppa. You'll get different names for it, and depending on how you transliterate. I bet you never heard of that, because I only learned this when I was working on the book. And I talked to Jim Strange about it before he died, obviously. And he helped me with this a great deal. Josephus says that Jaffa, Yaphia in Hebrew, is the largest town in the Galilee, not Nazareth. So this is the largest city. Josephus says it's the jewel or the crown of Galilee. Herod Antipas had his headquarters there. We're going to hear about the Herods. I've dug at Sepphoris for several years with Jim Strange, but Yaphia I'd never really focused on. Nazareth is a suburb of Yaphia. Now, Yaphia is actually the city south of Sepphoris. This was new to me. It can't be excavated because Nazareth is now a sprawling megapolis. It is the largest Arab city in what is often called the West Bank. So you can't dig there. I guess people could dig under their homes and find things as they've done at Nazareth. So you see this whole area is essentially a town south of Sepphoris. So what did I learn from digging at Sepphoris? Here I'm on a hillside overlooking Nazareth on the north, and I'm looking at the outcropping or the hill upon which Sepphoris was built. Don't get too excited. That's the Crusader building. I wish it was ancient. It's not. Where did Mary grow up and live? Now, I make a big deal about this, and I only have little strings to hang things on sometimes, but at least it's a string. For example, Jesus was a carpenter or a tecton or a builder. It's only mentioned once, Mark 6, verse 3. Is this not the carpenter? But we hang a lot on that, don't we? It's just a little string, but we want to know, how old was Jesus when he started his work and his preaching and when he died? One verse, one little reference. He was about 30 years old, Luke chapter 3. You see? So when we assemble Jesus evidence, we take these little strings and we try to put them together and see what sense we can make out of them because we're desperate to know more. I'm doing that with Mary, you see? I'm doing the same thing with Mary. And according to, this is a Byzantine tradition, so this is 4th, 5th century. Mary had a house with her family right here on the southern slope of Sepphoris. How about that? Mary grew up in Sepphoris. It's a new view. I'm thinking now of an urban Mary, not the Mary of later legend, and I respect this legend. I just don't think it's historical, that Mary went down to Jerusalem and she lived as a little 12-year-old girl in the temple, barefooted and a Vestal Virgin kind of life. I'm going to put her at Sepphoris growing up, and that's how she becomes engaged to Joseph, who I think possibly is from Nazareth. But notice, this is Nazareth, this is Sepphoris. Now, if you switch things around, this is a painting by Balazs that I had done for my book, The Jesus Dynasty. It would have been something like this. You would be in a little village south, and you would look and see the megapolis, the city to the north. This is what we think it would look like from the excavation, and it all hasn't been excavated. Here are some of the things that we did discover. This is the field that I worked in with Dr. Strange. And you can see here, you see that where we're digging, you go down just a meter and you come to first century remains. Isn't that amazing? I mean, at Mount Zion, we go down 12, 15 feet because there's been so much destruction of Jerusalem. So it's really exciting to dig at Sepphoris. These beautiful mosaics are part of a public building. Dr. Strange thought it was a municipal building. It's from the time of Jesus. It is first century. This is a fountain. These are all mosaics. They're getting ruined in the weather. They should be protected. But these are not the tourist mosaics that are much later. These are first century mosaics. They need to be protected. And I think they could possibly be part of Herod Antipas's palace. Remember, Sepphoris was destroyed in 4 BC, shortly after the birth of Jesus. And Herod Antipas built it up as his urban capital. This was my square the first year I went. I put it here because I wanted you to see how quickly we got down to the wall of a first century house and the street. Look, that's probably a meter. Here's a meter stick, 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters. You can imagine the excitement when we got to this stone, and then it's resting here. And of course, the wall is just so beautifully preserved. So much more could be done. But for us, I just want us to think about Mary. Let's try to imagine. I don't know that her parents were older. This is typical. This is Joachim. This is Anna. Remember, everyone becomes almost virginal later in the church because sexuality is considered less than spiritual and less than a highly developed form of spirituality. And so the picture here is that they're old and she couldn't have children. And then Mary's like a miraculous birth. These are 2nd, 3rd, 4th century legendary stories, mainly in what's called the Proto-Evangelium. I don't think it's very historical, but one thing it does say, and I'll pick and choose here, I'll admit it, is that they were wealthy. That Joachim was a very wealthy man and he spent time in the desert. And they didn't have a child and they wanted a child, and maybe it's true. And finally, she was able to conceive Mary. This is one of the great paintings. Here are the ruins of the medieval church that's built over the Byzantine ruins of Mary's house. This is on the slopes of Sepphoris. Almost nobody visits it. Here's a church that's also built there. Now, let's go from Sepphoris to Nazareth and just kind of keep in mind that maybe Mary had an urban background growing up, but she marries and is engaged to a man from Nazareth, Joseph, her husband. And this is, based on archaeology, our best guess as to what Nazareth might have looked like. Nazareth is built on a bunch of hills. It looks like 7 or 8 hills. And this is one of the valleys where modern Nazareth is centered now. And it might have been a village like this of maybe 200 people. It is called Branchtown. Netzer means branch. Very possibly, I think, because of the Davidic lineage of the Davidic families that lived here. That would be Mary, who's Davidic, and Joseph, who's Davidic, and others. This is what that very valley looks like today. So you got to picture it a little bit differently. But up here is Nazareth Village, that is a reconstruction in one of the only areas that it could be done where they've tried to reconstruct what the village of Nazareth might have been like. I'm more interested in what's underground. The basilica has recently been finished and renovated. And right across the street here were discovered fairly recently this first century house that got a lot of attention. You can see some of the walls and cisterns, and it's definitely dated to the 1st century. The Israel Antiquities Authority dug that. And let me just go back and show you something even more exciting. If you go down this alley right here, can you see that alley just right there? You come, it's off this picture, to the Sisters of Nazareth Convent. And Ken Dark has been digging there, excavating there for many, many years. He started in 206. This I urge you, if you're not part of the BAR library subscription, it is so cheap, it's almost free. You have access to 9,000 articles and all kinds of archives and Bible History Daily, which is free anyway. But you could go back and read this. That's how I got this PDF. I just went to my library subscription, logged in, and downloaded this PDF. A lot of the things in my bibliography will say Bible Review, Biblical Archaeology Review, Bible Odyssey, that sort of thing. You can get them all, as well as just so many other things. So be sure you explore that if you're new to this. Anyway, this is just one page from the article, March, April 2015. Now, Professor Dark has published a book right here, and it's the same picture, because he found under the convent first century ruins, and including a house. So you have a Byzantine church built over a house. And this is the academic book that I now own. You can look it up and order it. If you're interested in Nazareth and you're into archaeology, pay for it and get it. You can get it on Kindle, so it's not that expensive if you don't want to pay for the hardcover. But it's Palestine Exploration Fund publication. It's wonderful. And it's everything about Roman period, Byzantine, and Crusader site in central Jerusalem. Could this be Mary's house? You got to imagine something like this. This is a stone house with plaster. This is Nazareth Village. And it helps you to imagine a family. I'm going to go with a family of 8 crowded into basically what we call the family room. This was all built, Nazareth Village, with materials using ancient methods. Now, there's no fiberglass, no plastic, nothing that was not produced right there at the scene. If you can ever visit it, please do so. Now, I want now to say what happens to Mary after the crucifixion. We are told that this verse right here that I've already mentioned, there's an upper room, and we have a reference in the book of Acts that they gathered together in this upper room, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, is with his brothers. I think that Mary lived out the rest of her life in Jerusalem. And here's something I learned that I never knew as a non-Catholic. If you look at classic art of the day of Pentecost, Mary is always there, always. She's always there. Here she is in the center. I love it. And we've got Jesus, and we've got the angels, Gabriel probably, and Michael. And we've got other guardian angels, and here we've got the 12, and Mary's in the center. This is the Mary I promote in my book. Mary's the matriarch of the movement. We talk about Mary Magdalene being the first founder of Christianity. Look, the two are very united, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus. Sometimes we can't tell in the 2nd and 3rd century sources which Mary it is. But Mary does not disappear. She does not, I don't think she goes to Asia Minor. I think she stays in Jerusalem. Here's a montage. I'm sorry for the quality. I just picked it out of Google, but you can see Mary's in every one of these pictures. Sometimes she looks a little more heavenly, but here she looks like, hey, boys, gather around. I'm the mother of the movement. Here's what we're going to do. You read the book of Acts, and other than that one verse mentioning her, she's gone. That's what I mean by forgotten. But we do have some evidence, and I'm going to do this really quickly because I'm watching my time here. This is the Dormition Abbey, built at the turn of the last century by the Germans, and it is supposedly over the place where Mary fell asleep, Dormition, to fall asleep. And right here is the upper room, the traditional upper room. This is what it looked like in 1873, just clear things away. And you can see that there is no Dormition Abbey, and here is the upper room. Bargill Pixner, again, a Bar article. This is May, June 90. So my thesis is that, yes, there's the Church of the Apostles on Mount Zion, and archaeologically it's valid. Here upstairs you have the upper room, some of you visited. That's medieval. Downstairs you have the Tomb of David, also Middle Ages. I don't think either one of these is a valid location, but I think the space is valid, not for David's tomb necessarily. But right here is the window of David's tomb. This is the upper room. Do you realize Jews down below are praying at the second most holy site. Christians up above are praying at their second most holy site after the Church Holy Sepulchre. So these two religions come 1 meter apart. Christians going up the stairs, Jews going down. Of course, you can go to either one. If you're there, I'll take you to both. But look at these stones right here. This is what Pixter began to notice. This is the Madaba map, which is Byzantine, 6th century. And this is the Church of Mary in the Byzantine period. What is that little building there? Pixner believed that that was preserved. That is the upper room. That's the structure of the upper room built in the Byzantine period. Here you have the Pope in the upper room, pious Jews praying in the lower room. So we have the upper room, the lower room. A lot of conflict on who owns it. I just think this is amazing that Mary's being revered in the upper room and Jesus in the Last Supper and in the lower part of the memory of David. These are the stones I want you to notice. This is in the corner of the lower room. These are in situ. This is the corner of a building from the Byzantine period. Here's what it looks like in the back. You can see the courses of stones. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The building was destroyed. Here's a drawing. These are all in the Bar Magazine article. The foundations of this building, I believe, are the same as the ancient Roman house that Jesus ate the Last Supper in. Remember, it was a private residence. 1st century floor has been found below it, which this is all with Christian graffiti. So if you want to read all about that, read the Bar article. This is my student, David Clausen, who's written the definitive book on the upper room in the tomb of David. What happened then is when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, they left, this is Mount Zion, they left this out of the city. Okay, so there were some ruins of buildings, probably from the 1st century. We have pilgrims going in the 4th century talking about the little church of the apostles on Mount Zion. And then during the time of the Nea Church, Justinian, this would be 6th century, they built a basilica. But see this little building here? This is that rebuilt upper room that still is intact today. And now, of course, what we see is the medieval stage of it. So why do I go into that? Because I think that's where Mary lived. When I go to the upper room, when I go to the lower room, I believe I'm in the perimeters, I'm in the courtyard. There's a well there that's 1st century. I believe this is where James lived, the brothers lived. I think this is where Mary spent her life. The best traditions we have on Mary is not that she went to Asia Minor with the fisherman, John, the son of Zebedee. This doesn't even make sense to me. As you know, I think James is the beloved disciple, so obviously wouldn't make sense. I think she stays and becomes a leader in the movement. So this is Stephen Shoemaker's book. He's by far the greatest researcher on Mary in the field today. And here are all of the traditions about Mary's dormition, her falling asleep. And this is one of the older paintings, the Byzantine paintings of her falling asleep. The Eastern Church has these traditions. If you go in the basement area of the Dormition Abbey, here's a wooden representation of Mary dying. She dies a few feet from the upper room. They probably dies in that upper room building, I should say. Now, how did she get marginalized? With Mark, all we get is the Nazareth scene and the crucifixion. The Nazareth scene, remember I said it's usually taken negatively? I take it positively, but we get that Nazareth scene and we get the brothers identified, then we get the crucifixion. In Matthew, he follows Mark, but he does add a birth narrative. John never names Jesus' mother. She does play a role 2 times in his gospel, and she's also at the crucifixion. Paul says she's born of a woman. I think the way she begins to get marginalized is later in Luke Acts. Remember, we're going chronologically down the line when we get to Luke Acts. Notice these comparisons. Here is Mark's account that is very full. Look what Luke takes this and changes it. Is this not Joseph's son? What happened to the family? Of course, Jesus has a mother, but here they're active and they're involved and they're named. Luke just says, is this not Joseph's son? Look at the crucifixion. You're naming Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, Joseph, James and Joseph. That is, of course, the mother of Jesus. He just said that. Salome, who I think is a sister. Look how Luke turns that into, and all those who knew him and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance and saw these things. That's the parallel to this. Doesn't name them. Here, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jose, that's one of Jesus' brothers, saw where he was laid. Clearly, the family, including Mary Magdalene, are involved in the burial. This is family stuff. This is intimate stuff. This is major stuff. Notice Luke just says the women who'd come from Galilee. And then finally, at the tomb, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, Salome, they bring spices. They went to the tomb. Now, at the end, he does mention Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James, so I'm not saying it's a complete erasure, but you see how you're beginning to read accounts in which she's not that important. When you get to the book of Acts, it totally fades. Remember that there's one thing the writer of Acts cannot do. He can't get rid of James. And if Mary's the mother of James, and I think she is, then she's there wherever James is, because James is her caretaker. And so we have Mary and the brothers in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2. Later, they're referred to, go tell James and the brothers. James replied, my decision is. On the following day, Paul went in to see James. But those are the only mentions of James right here, 3 times. Did you know, we now say pretty regularly, most of us, James took over the leadership of the movement after Jesus died. That's my book, The Jesus Dynasty. If you read just Acts and Luke, I don't know, you would wonder really what's going on, because who is this guy that's saying my decision is? If you remember, when the children are named, they're not in Luke, see? And so who is this guy? James said, my decision is. Paul has to go in and talk to James. Paul mentions James, of course, in the book of Galatians. I think the marginalization happened and because there was no longer an interest in the earthly Jesus, in the family of Jesus. Part of it is sexuality. If everybody's going to be celibate, from Joseph to Mary to Jesus to maybe even almost Joachim and Anna, you say, well, Joachim and Anna weren't celibate. Read the Evangelium of James, where it says Joachim's out of town and he comes back and Anna announces, I'm pregnant, and he's been gone for a long journey, a long time in that context. So I think there's this idea that these people are so special, the Mother of God, the Holy Mother of God, the Theotokos and so forth, that the human side becomes muted. It can't be ignored in the first century because Mary's his mother and she's there. But it's simply that we hardly even know who James is, right? Like you would not know James except for these references in Acts, and then Paul's references in Galatians 1. That's about it. And so there's more. I think Paul puts it well. We're interested in the Christ of the Spirit, not Jesus in the flesh. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians, even if we once knew him after the flesh, we don't know him that way any longer. So I think the marginalization of Mary and her great leadership, which I assume if she raised this amazing family of 5 boys, maybe some of you have 5 children, I don't know. That, boy, that tells me what is it like to raise 5 boys and maybe 3 girls. And if she's widowed early on, what strength this woman had, which inspiration. And, if I had to speculate, where is Jesus learning these things? You say, oh, he learned them from God, or he got them from the Holy Spirit. I'm going to give the mother credit. I think Mary said, turn the other cheek, Jesus. Don't worry if they call you names. You treat them good. And quoted scriptures to back it up. I see Mary as a spiritual teacher of Jesus and James. And when I read the book of James and I read the Sermon on the Mount, I hear the voice of Mary. Thank you.